Welcome to this session. It's clearly the last of 3 days and people have got a bit of a head, I suspect, from last night's party. But it's a really important topic, and a little bit about myself. I'll let the panel introduce themselves. So I'm, as Amy announced, I'm Bhavna Toaz. I'm Head of Group Credit Policy at Shawbrook, and we're a fairly new bank. We're about 12 years old. So our culture is developing as we grow. I'm also the chair of Race at Work at Shawbrook, so this is a topic close to my own heart. And that's why I thought it was quite an important session to have the pleasure of hosting for you. And I've got a great panel, and I'll move straight to Shania and let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Bhavna, and hi everyone. I'm Shania Ferdinand. I work at NatWest. My day role is working as the Enterprise Community Strategy Director, so leading on how we better engage and support ethnic minority business owners, so really thinking about inclusive entrepreneurship initiatives. But I also have, another hat, so I am one of the co-chairs for our Racial Equality Task Force, which was set up in 2020 as a response by the CEO to look at how we were thinking about what the experience was for our colleagues, customers and communities from a racial equality perspective. And just a highlight, I've also done some time working on our DE&I team internally, so thinking about policies and processes for colleagues as well. I'll pass over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Thomas. I'm the country manager of Equifax Workforce Solutions, and I'm really thrilled to be here. At Equifax, I co-chair one of our ERG groups that addresses inclusion and diversity initiatives at Equifax.
Hi everyone, my name is Lizzie Reed. It's really great to be here today. My role, Simon was on a panel just earlier, so introduced what we're doing here at JP Morgan Chase, but my role is Head of Credit Strategy for Consumer Lending. We're going to be launching in the UK very, very soon with our first borrow product, so super excited about that. And then when I had the opportunity to be on this panel with an esteemed panel, I just took the chance and jumped straight in, so really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, panel. That's a little bit about us. We're going to dive straight into the questions, and as it's an unconferencing session, I think you get the opportunity to vote on which of the questions you'd like us to cover, and also please take the opportunity to post any questions as well. But I'm going to start with, I think the obvious question is, what is the ethnic minority glass ceiling? And I'm going to put that to you, Lizzie, just to define.
Sure, just to define. So, you know, in its simplest term, it's the invisible barriers that are there for those that are from ethnic minority backgrounds in terms of progressing their career through the organisation into higher positions. And this can be on the backdrop of having the same qualifications as their peers, having the same experiences, the same skills. And so it's a really important topic for today to think about how we can help to start to think about breaking those barriers for those who are from an ethnic minority background. And we're going to cover some of that today.
Thanks, Lizzie. And for me, that's absolutely right. It's trying to define what is specific for the ethnic minority community and what does hamper progression for people from that community. I'm not sure what question we've got next, but I'm going to move on to my list. So I'm going to go to you, Shania, to just talk about, have you seen others or had to navigate obstacles yourself to overcome the ethnic minority glass ceiling?
Yes, I think it's probably I've more witnessed it in other colleagues, although I would say maybe my most recent career experience is probably something I'm now coming up against or starting to think about. But we have, so our organisation has a target for ethnicity. So our aim is to get to 14% in our top 4 layers by 2025. And in 2020, alongside a number of other organisations, I think we discovered or came to the realisation that actually we had a real challenge with progressing black talent. So while we were seeing progress from an ethnicity perspective broadly, when you then sort of disaggregate and look at different ethnic groups, we were seeing that there was a challenge around where black colleagues were in different organisations. And I think there were a number of reasons for that. But one thing that when you speak to colleagues, their experiences are that they are applying for many roles and are being rejected for these roles, but aren't necessarily being given really clear feedback about what it is that they're lacking or what it is that they need to develop in order to progress into those roles. When we have talent programs, there aren't necessarily focused attempts to look at where are we making sure that the people that are going through those talent programs that are representative of, the organisation of society, are we making sure that we're giving people the opportunity to stretch themselves? Are we giving them really clear feedback? Are we actively, as senior leaders who are looking to build that talent pipeline, sponsoring colleagues to do that? And I think where we've seen colleagues then try to navigate that themselves, you then have the creation of affiliation groups or, resource groups. But then what that means is colleagues are trying to take some of these policies and processes into their own hands, and they're really passionate and they're making great strides. But actually, we need to make sure that these solutions are being embedded in the organisations and that there are accountable owners within the organisations, within leadership teams that are proactively doing this and not just relying on colleagues who are facing these barriers to solve it for themselves.
Yeah, I think when you say that, I think it's quite important that the organisation has a responsibility in that and not just left to pockets of people within an organisation to decide that. Do either of you two want to?
Yeah, I think I agree with exactly the approach. It has to be holistic. I think when you're addressing it, it has to come through the whole employee life cycle, from the onboarding through to the performance review process, and even sometimes through to the exit interview. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but by getting a good baseline, which it seems as if you do, and then you identified where you were even shortfall on that baseline, you're able to really proactively create initiatives that address that baseline. It definitely has to be a full life cycle. And I've seen from a personal experience, and I've mentioned this to Bhavna, where it's not a full life cycle. And then I've been in the environment where it was kind of like a pluck. Okay, here we are, we have a target to meet, here's this person, we're gonna promote her to that role. And then that doesn't create success for that individual either, because then they start to question why they're in that role, why me, things like that. So it's really, really important, I think, to be systematic across the journey of that employee to ensure that you don't have people feeling as if they've been selected as a token, and then also ensuring that you can get that baseline of where your gaps are.
So when we talked about this question before, obviously today, I kind of put a different spin on it. I don't have any personal experiences in terms of the ethnic glass ceiling and stuff, but being, the lead for credit strategy, consumer lending, we take a really important focus on looking at the importance of financial inclusion. And I think there is a halo effect in the sense that when we're focusing on that dimension, we are actually also indirectly helping barriers for the ethnic minority folks in the UK, et cetera, to get access to credit. And so one of the things that we've done here at Chase is we don't use geo attributes within our credit scorecards, and it's been a focus that we've had very close to our heart. We kind of run bias assessments across a whole bunch of kind of processes, capabilities. And in doing that, we are basically trying to understand any indirect discrimination to certain factors that are highlighted in the Equality Act. And so obviously race being one. So we made a really distinguished position to say, right, we don't want to put geo attributes in our scorecards because whilst there are elements that people say, well, that helps drive access to credit, well, not for those people that live in postcodes where there's a higher contribution of ethnic minorities. So that was kind of the angle I want to put towards it, and I think it's important that when we're designing products, processes, that we're not just focusing on kind of the ethnic minority strides to help improve that within the workplace, but also to look at it more broadly and holistically.
Very much.
I think we're going to move to some of the questions that are on the board. Should we start with the first one? How can we create allyship to support our colleagues and customers? And I think there are two groups actually, and I think as a lending. As banks and lenders, we do have community responsibility as well as what we do internally. But how we can support colleagues and customers who are from the ethnic minority community. Who would like to start with that? I'm looking at you, Lisa.
I'll start with that because, I really do believe that for all of us working in this industry, we do have to be aware of our sense of privilege or sense of opportunity. And I think once you have that awareness, it's really important to give back a little bit. And I like to, it is really allyship. You know, when you see meetings and you see people not being heard, or you see meetings where people aren't having the opportunity to present, I really take it up on myself as an individual and even with my team members to really be listening, observing that, advocating for them. It doesn't always mean recommending them for promotions. I personally believe it's the little things that you can do to let them feel heard, seen, and belong that gives them that strength to want to go and maybe apply for that job in the future. So I really do believe all of us in every role have a sense of privilege to be able to bring others along through allyship.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think I've always been quite fortunate in that the majority of managers I've worked with have been really supportive of me. But one thing that they've done for me that when I speak to other colleagues who don't have that same experience is they've taken the time to speak to me to understand what are my motivations, what are my ambitions, where do I want to get to. And I think we can all be guilty sometimes of just assuming that everybody wants the exact same thing as us, or if we see someone who we think is similar to us to maybe make those assumptions. And I think that for people to be real allies, they need to almost step outside of what's comfortable and familiar for them to really understand the experience of whether it's their teams or whether it's their mentees or whether it's just their own peers, to understand what is your life experience, what are some of the things that are impacting the way you make decisions and where you want to go. But most importantly, where do you want to get to and what are your motivations? And then really sitting and thinking, how is it that I can support that, utilising whatever privilege I may have that you don't have. How do I give you that space to do that? But I think I know it's hard because we have such busy jobs and it's go, but we sometimes need to really take that step back to give people the space to understand them, to support them.
Yeah, and I mean, if I can add as well from JP Morgan, I must admit I've been here, 5 years nearly, and there's a huge commitment right from the top to diversity inclusion, and it goes all the way through all the levels down to the bottom, and we have the same employee business resource groups and stuff, and one area that actually when I was researching a little bit more ahead of this panel is we also have what we call executive forums for so we've got a Black executive forum, Hispanics, Asians, and LGBTQ+ as well, and this is for people who are MD+, and they are there to be ambassadors, to drive representation, to drive firm-wide initiatives. And I think that's really important because it kind of demonstrates the importance of having that support network at every single layer of the organisation. And I mean, another thing as well, we're very focused on training within diversity as well. So kind of not just focusing on the typical, unconscious bias type basic training, but, going a lot more deeper into understanding, different cultures and training around that as well. So I think that helps kind of create that bedrock to then understand a lot more about the people that you're working with and then obviously be able to be a better ally because you can trust that person a lot more.
And how's that cultural training been? How's that been delivered?
We kind of through a number of different angles. There's kind of online training, but we also have more kind of sub-team stuff where, I've got my colleagues in the audience who could probably talk to it as well. But we also, we have calendars. We really focus on people coming to a team meeting, telling us about any religious, events that they've been going through, things like that. So I think it's just really important. And I find it fascinating just learning about different people's backgrounds. We can just build a much more diverse organisation.
Yeah, because I'm a real believer in understanding other people around you, what their pressures are, what they're thinking. It helps to work out how people think. And then you have a diverse thinking group and you don't think in the same group think, which is what really this is, to me, this is all about making sure that you make better business decisions because you've got lots of people who think differently from you and you come to a good solution yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to move on to the next question, next most popular. Can you tell me a story where you supported someone from an ethnic minority workplace and how it helped them? And I'll take this one to begin with.
Yeah.
You look all relieved. Actually, it was reverse mentoring for me. A senior member of Shawbrook approached me as chair of Race at Work and asked what I could do to help them understand better. And this is somebody at the board. What pressures I have. And it just started off with conversation, just simple conversation. We had a cup of tea, we had a chat, I talked about my background, they talked about theirs. They came from more white privileged background, and I come from an inner city background, and it was the journey that I took compared to theirs to get to where I was. And I think that how it helped them was to understand how to relate to other people and actually look at our organisation with different eyes and think it's a wider pool of people, bigger talent pool to think about, and not always just trust. Trust is a big thing, and learn to trust people that don't necessarily you can instantly relate to because they look like you, was really where I think I helped them to ask more probing questions about people and do that understanding of their culture bit.
Yeah.
Anybody on the panel would like to add a story?
Yeah, so I mentor a number of people who have come into the organisation following myself. A number of them are sort of graduates, and there's one colleague in particular who joined the organisation a few years ago who I started mentoring, and I recognised that they had a passion for the work that I was doing at the time, which was around what we do to create safe spaces for some of our customer groups, particularly those from diverse backgrounds, and through doing that work and allowing them to sort of join projects that I was doing, shadow me on certain days and participate in that. When I then went on to a different role, they were one of the people that I sort of put forward, suggested that they would be good to potentially fill that role alongside other people. It wasn't just them, but through the proactive relationship that they had a really great understanding of the work that I did, and actually that helped to really, for them to then go and succeed in getting that role. And I think for me, it's about that. How are we ensuring that we are building a talent pipeline and understanding what talent is out there, and working with not just one person but a number of people, and really giving them the opportunity to understand the role and be ready for that next role at the point that it becomes available. So that's one of the ways that I've supported someone at my organisation.
Can we have the questions back up, please?
They've disappeared.
Lovely, thank you. The next question is, how do you support those who suffer from imposter syndrome with a lack of role models in the industry?
Yeah, well, I'll take that because, as I mentioned, my experience, which was a little bit of a flip with an organization that I worked with. And I have to say, when I interviewed with this organization, I did walk the floor and I really saw no one that looked like me. And that might have been a good sign that it was not going to be a fit, but I continued on. And I think, because of that situation, and obviously as transparent as they were about my recruitment, that imposter syndrome did come on. And I really started to doubt my capabilities, and I really started to doubt that I was the right person for the role. So, I think for me, and what I would say to anyone who is going through that, you have to be ready to trust your gut, have that courageous conversation with my manager at the time, and then I brought other people to the table. Like I kept saying, in certain circumstances, why am I presenting? Can I have my colleague, Michelle, come with me? Really started to promote those opportunities and kind of take a little bit of that spotlight or that type of angle away. And so I think, again, back to that allyship, have those courageous conversations with your colleagues if they're sensing that. Help support them having conversations with their manager, making sure that within your organization there is that feedback loop that allows that to be a clear conversation that you can have. And then outside of that, the mentoring or other training tools that you can bring in, it's really important. But for that individual, I really feel it's important to trust your gut, be brave to have that courageous conversation, advocate for yourself. And I always say, if you don't see anyone reaching out to you, there's no reason why you can't reach out to them. Yeah. That's part of the journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually I'm thinking of another conversation I had on the train, but we talked about a really great example, the film King William, so about, Venus and Serena Williams. And so you look at their career history, the imposter syndrome that they must have experienced getting into the tennis industry. And I think, you look at the perseverance that they had, the resilience they had against discrimination. and just their desire and courage to change the industry, to change the tennis industry, to be role models for the first, black women tennis players. And look what they've done. So you've got to think of yourselves as somebody breaking those barriers, being that role model, and paving the way for the future of everyone else. And I think it's a fabulous example of how to think about this.
Yeah. I would like to add a couple of things, actually. I think, first of all, I've heard this conversation around imposter syndrome for a number of years, and one thing that I've realised or come to reflect on is sometimes we sit and think, oh, I feel like such an imposter, no one else is feeling this way. But actually, when you speak to other people, I think everybody in the world has felt like an imposter at one point or another, no matter what background they come from, no matter where. There will have been a situation that you've been in that you just didn't even feel equipped, knowledgeable enough, or like you belonged. And I think us being vulnerable enough to actually share those moments when we recognise someone else is going through that is really helpful, because it's that whole piece about feeling less alone and not feeling so othered or feeling like an outsider that it helps with. But another thing that I did for myself was, in my organisation, there are a number of, I was telling you about this earlier, a number of black female colleagues. And although each of us tends to be the only one that's in our direct team, you walk around the office and there's this thing called the nod, where you'll see a colleague and you might not know them, but you'll give them a smile, and there's that bit of connection between you. So I started to just have those conversations, and then I turned it into a bit of an unofficial network, which then progressed into turning into something that we did a couple of years ago, where we reached out to the black networks of around 20 organisations, so organisations like Deloitte, McKinsey, KPMG, and we just said, let's just get together, let's just do an event. And we had around 100 black colleagues from all of these different organisations come together. We had a panel of senior leaders, and what that did was it really just created that space of, although I can sometimes feel really alone, actually I can see that there are role models in my industry. I just had to put myself out there to find them. And I think there are organisations like BYP, the Network of Networks, the Black British Business Awards, the Power List, and sorry, I'm talking specifically black because I am black, but there are these networks for Asian professionals, and women professionals, but actively participating in those kinds of going to those events and those networks really helps you to feel connected and helps you to realise there are other people who are also going through some of these challenges. And apologies, I know we don't have much time, so I'll shut up now.
No, and we don't have much time, and we could talk for another hour probably. I know we have as a group. I'm going to take this question, and I've got one final question from our pre-prepared list, and it's actually that, given that this panel is all women, and I know the question says, what's the biggest barriers for ethnic minorities, and how do you feel, and do you feel there's a significant gender gap? It's the second question I'd like you to address. I mean, I think there is a significant gender gap. I don't know with my panelists. Feel that?
Yeah, I can start, and then you can jump in. So we've recently, and I say recently, it's been the last 2 years, started actually looking at our colleagues' socioeconomic data. So we started asking questions around what was your parents' job when you were 14 years old, and there's another question that, forgive me, I can't remember, but ultimately it's to kind of get a gauge of what is the socioeconomic transition of people who now work in our organisation from when they were growing up. And when we got some of the data back, one of the things that we found was I think it was women of colour in our organisation, only 14% of them were in senior roles, compared with maybe it was around 70% of white men who came from a similar socioeconomic background. And I think what that tells us is, albeit you may have like similar qualifications or sometimes be even more qualified from an educational perspective, there are still barriers, and they are wider for women of colour than they are in our industry in particular. They are wider for women of colour, and I think again, it can come down to a number of reasons.
Yeah. I do think that, and back to your point, can be a number of reasons. Is it in the application process? Like, I always wonder, why do we have to put our name and our ethnicity in that first submission? Is it in the interview process, right? Is that where the gap starts to widen? I know in my previous job, we found a lot of our fallout, gender-wise, was in the interview process for promotion specifically. So we brought in HR was mandatory for HR to be in all of our second round interviews just to ensure the scoring was on level and that we gave everyone an equal opportunity. So I do think, the gender gap can come in different areas as well within an organization, and really trying to look at where, as your data showed you, the gap was, but at what stage? Was it because of the performance review process? Was it because of the interview process for that job? Or was it just because of your applicant, pool system? Those are all factors that help identify a solution.
Yeah, and I think, to that point as well, just to add on, like we've talked about, there has to be a commitment, accountability from the top. So making sure you've got the metrics to be able to measure it. At our organisation, we have a self-ID process. So we self-ID around our demographics, our sexuality, a whole bunch of things. And once you have that, you can then start to measure your performance against those measures, right? Your promotion rates, your retention rates, your hiring rates, and then you can start to see where the pockets of opportunity are. And until you have that data, you don't really know. So I think that's a really important thing to do.
And I would say make it continuous. It's a continuous loop of feedback, just like we do with our credit data. It's a continuous loop of feedback.
No, all good points. Yeah. We literally have a minute, don't we? I keep getting a minute. She waved at me. One sentence. Okay. What advice would you give to ethnic minority professional or an organisation to tackle the ethnic glass ceiling? One sentence, please. Who'd like to start?
Be more proactive in building a talent pipeline and getting to know your talent.
Representation matters. Whether it's somebody that you're bringing in to do a course, somebody that's at a leadership, representation matters.
Yeah, and I think diversification, representation matters not only in the workplace, but with the products you're designing, the services you're providing.
I think that's my panel over. Please come and approach any of us if you would want to talk to us more. We could all talk quite a lot about this. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.